The road was long and almost empty at that time of day. The kind of road that cuts through the interior of Minas Gerais like a long scar, bordered by tall grass and wire fences that no longer enclose anything. Daniel Moreira drove with the windows slightly open, his left arm resting on the door, his Swiss watch reflecting the late afternoon light like a small sun pinned to his wrist. He wasn't in a hurry. I had nowhere to urgently return to. The meeting in Belo Horizonte had ended earlier than expected, and he preferred to take the old road instead of the highway, perhaps because the highway didn't pass through the place where he had grown up, and that afternoon, without quite knowing why, Daniel wanted to pass nearby. Not go in, just pass by, like someone touching an old wound just to see if it still hurts. He saw the car stopped on the shoulder before he saw the woman. A silver Fiat Palio, at least 15 years old, its hood up, a thin wisp of smoke rising lazily against the orange sky. There was a child's car seat in the back. He noticed that before anything else. Then he saw the woman. She was facing away from him, her hair haphazardly tied back, wearing a faded knit top and a skirt that had once been a different color. She stared at the engine as if looking at an unsolvable problem, hands on her hips and shoulders slumped, not from defeat, but from exhaustion, the exhaustion of someone who has already solved too many things alone. Daniel slowed down. Something about him, perhaps the car seat, perhaps her shoulders, perhaps the road leading to the place where he had been a boy, made him pull the car over to the side of the road, about 20 meters ahead. He turned off the engine. He stood there for a moment, looking in the rearview mirror. The woman didn't move. She didn't look back. Perhaps she had already given up waiting for help. Perhaps she already knew that nobody stops. He got out of the car and walked slowly toward her. His Italian shoes clicked on the hot asphalt. The contrast was almost obscene. The dark suit, the loose tie around his neck, the expensive cologne carried by the wind, and there, in the middle of nowhere, a woman with grease-stained hands trying to understand why the car wouldn't start. "Need help." She turned around, and for a second that lasted far too long, they stood still, staring at each other. Daniel felt a strange sensation in his chest, like a drawer that's trying to open but is stuck. Her face was familiar in a way he couldn't quite name. The dark eyes, the full lips, a small mole near her left ear. He knew that face, but he didn't know from where. "Thank you," she said, her voice firm, as if thanking someone without asking. "I think it's the belt, or the radiator. I don't know, it just died." Daniel took off his jacket, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and leaned over the engine. He wasn't a mechanic, but he'd grown up fixing things. Before the $1 million contracts, before the meeting rooms with tinted glass, before everything, he'd been the boy who fixed the neighbors' bicycles, who replaced shower heads, who improvised solutions with wire and electrical tape. His hands still remembered. "It's the radiator hose," he said after a moment. "It burst. It lost water. That's why it overheated." She nodded silently, like someone receiving yet another piece of news they can't afford. She didn't complain. She didn't cry. She simply crossed her arms and looked at the floor, biting her lower lip, doing invisible calculations. Daniel recognized that gesture. It was the gesture of someone choosing between lunch and the repair. "I have some silicone tape in the trunk," he said. "I can make a temporary repair. You should be able to get to the city." She looked up. "You don't have to do that." "I know." He went back to the car, grabbed the tape, a bottle of mineral water, and a clean cloth. He worked in silence for several minutes, his hands slowly getting dirty, sweat beginning to stain his shirt. She stood beside him, speechless, holding her cell phone, which had no signal, as if it were a useless amulet. From inside the car, there was no sound. The child was asleep. "How old are you?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the engine. "3. She turned 3 in March." "Boy?" "Girl, Beatrice." Daniel smiled, a smile she didn't see. Beatrice. The name was beautiful. It had weight. It had intention. It was the name of someone chosen carefully. "My name is Daniel," he said, wiping his hands on the cloth. She hesitated for a second. "Luciana." And then the drawer opened. Daniel stopped moving. His hands remained still in the air, holding the cloth. "Luciana. Luciana Fernandez, the girl from the yellow house, the girl who sat in the last seat at the municipal school in São Sebastião do Brejo. The girl who lent him colored pencils when his ran out, who shared her lunch without him asking, who wrote notes folded in 4 and put them inside his notebook, notes that he kept for years in a shoebox under his bed, until his mother threw them all away during a move. The girl he loved from the age of 11 to 14 with that enormous, silent love that only exists when we don't yet know the name of what we feel. He looked at her again. Her face was the same. Thinner, more tired, with fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but her eyes were the same. Exactly the same. She didn't recognize him. And why would she? At 14, Daniel was a skinny boy in ripped shorts and flip-flops, his hair cut at home by his grandmother and his skin tanned by the sun. The Daniel who stood before her now wore a linen shirt, drove an imported car, and had his teeth straightened by an orthodontist who charged more than the house where he grew up. He was the same, but he didn't look it. "Luciana Fernandez," he said softly. She frowned. "How do you know my last name?" "Municipal School, Padre Antonio, San Sebastián de Brecho, Teacher Marta's class." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that changes the temperature of the air. She took a step back, squinted, tilted her head, and then, slowly, like finding an old photograph at the bottom of a drawer, her face changed. "Daniel Moreira, Danny, Dona Zilda's son?" He simply nodded. Luciana put her hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of that nameless kind of emotion that comes when the past finds you on an empty road and stares you down. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I thought I'd never see you again." And that simple sentence carried so much weight that Daniel had to look away, because he thought so too. After his grandmother died and he went to live with an uncle in Uberlandia, after he lost contact with everyone in São Sebastião, after life pushed him towards college, business, money, elegant solitude, he thought that part of his life had died, that the boy who loved the girl from the yellow house no longer existed. But there, on that road, with his hands dirty with grease and his heart beating too fast, he realized that the boy had never left. He was just waiting. They remained silent for a while, not out of embarrassment, but out of respect. The kind of silence that happens when two people feel the same thing and know that any words would fall short. Luciana spoke first. "You seem different." "I am different." "No, you look different. But your eyes are the same." She smiled, and the smile had the same shape as when they were 12, and that smile that started in their eyes before reaching their mouth. "You've always had this way of looking at things as if you were trying to understand everything at once." Daniel didn't answer. Because she was right, and because that's exactly what he was doing at that moment, trying to understand how life draws such long paths only to bring us back to the same place. He finished the repair. He put water in the radiator. He started the engine and waited. The Palio coughed, hesitated, and then it started, with that stubborn dignity of things that should have stopped but keep going. "It should hold up until we get to the city," he said. "But it needs a new hose, and the oil, and the brakes, from what I saw. Luciana, this car—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "I know what he needs. I just can't right now." She said it without shame, without excuse, with the nonchalance of someone who has learned that poverty is not a character flaw but a circumstance. Daniel felt his eyes burn. "Beatrice's father? He left before she was born. He said he wasn't ready. I wasn't either, but I stayed." The sentence was simple, but within it lay an entire life. Daniel saw in those few words the sleepless nights, the double shifts, the loneliness of raising a daughter without anyone to share the fear with. He saw courage disguised as routine. He saw a woman whom the world treated with indifference and who responded with presence. Beatrice woke up at that moment. She made a small sound, a murmur of a child still between sleep and the world. Luciana opened the back door and picked her up with a gesture so natural and so full of tenderness that Daniel felt he was seeing something sacred. The girl rested her face on her mother's neck and stayed there, quiet, safe, as if that were the only place in the world that existed. "Hi, my love," Luciana whispered. "We're leaving now." Daniel looked at the two of them, and at that moment, with the sun setting behind the hills and the light turning honey-colored, he understood something that all the money in the world had failed to teach, that true wealth is not what one possesses, but what one is able to give when one has nothing. "Luciana?" "I'll go ahead. You follow me. If the car stalls again, I'll be there." She wanted to refuse. He saw the refusal forming on her lips, that silent pride of someone who doesn't accept a favor out of fear of obligation. But something in the way he spoke, without pity, without superiority, just with the quiet firmness of someone asking to stay close, made her simply nod. They drove in convoy to the nearest small town. Daniel was in the front, driving slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds. Luciana was in the back, with her headlights dimmed, and Beatrice was humming a song only she knew in the back seat. When they arrived, he stopped at a gas station and waited for her to pull up alongside. "Is there a workshop here?" he asked. "There's Seu Hiraldo, but he only opens tomorrow." "Then I'll be back tomorrow," she laughed, a short, incredulous laugh. "Daniel, you don't need to—" "I know I don't need it. I want it." She looked at him for a long moment. And in that look there was a question she didn't ask and an answer he didn't give, but which they both understood. There was the weight of 20 years of distance, of lives that ran in opposite directions, of a love that began with folded notes and never had a chance to grow. There was the doubt of someone who had already been abandoned and the hope of someone who still remembers what it's like to want to stay. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. Not the company card, with the gold logo and imposing title. He pulled out a simple white card with just a phone number. He handed it to her. "If you need anything, anytime." She took the card, looked at it, and put it in her skirt pocket. "Thank you, Danny." Danny. No one had called him that in 20 years. The word entered him like a key going into a rusty lock. Everything opened. He returned to the car. He started the engine. He stood there with his hands on the steering wheel for a full minute, staring ahead without seeing anything. Then, in the rearview mirror, he saw Luciana get into the Palio with Beatrice in her lap, adjust the car seat, carefully fasten her daughter's seatbelt, check the mirrors, each small, precise gesture, each movement imbued with that silent competence of mothers who do everything alone and never ask for applause. He returned the next day, and the day after that. On the first day, he took the car to Soheraldo and paid for the entire repair without Luciana knowing. He asked the mechanic to say it was a courtesy, that he owed him a favor. Luciana was suspicious. She wasn't naive, but she accepted because she needed the car for work and because sometimes accepting help is the most difficult act of courage there is. On the second day, he brought a toy for Beatrice, nothing expensive, a wooden rocking horse he'd bought at a roadside shop. The girl took the toy, looked at it with those enormous eyes that were an exact copy of her mother's, and said, "Obrigada, thank you," with her tongue still learning the words. Daniel felt something break inside him, not from pain, but from openness, like a dam that finally gives way and lets the water flow. The visits continued, always with pretexts. He was passing through the area, had a meeting nearby, wanted to see if the car was working. Luciana didn't question the pretexts. Perhaps because she also wanted to believe them. Perhaps because his company, sitting on the porch of her simple house, drinking coffee from an aluminum mug and listening to Beatrice tell impossible stories about the wooden horse, was the first good thing she'd experienced in years. It was on one of those afternoons, with the sun streaming through the window and the tablecloth littered with crumbs from the cake she had baked, that Luciana asked, looking at her own hands, "Why did you come back, Daniel?" "Really?" He thought about lying. He thought about saying something about chance, about coincidence, about the road. But he looked at her hands marked by work, at her eyes that still had the same light as when she was 12, at the mouth he had wanted to kiss his whole life but never had the courage to. And he told the truth. "Because I never forgot you. Because when I was 13, you lent me a blue pencil and I thought it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever done for me. Because you used to put notes in my notebook and I would read each one 100 times. Because when I left San Sebastián, the only thing that truly hurt was not having told you how I felt. And because yesterday, when I saw you on that road, hands on your hips and tired shoulders, I knew that 20 years hadn't changed anything. I came back because I never truly left." The silence that followed was the longest and the shortest of his life. Luciana didn't answer with words. She got up from her chair, walked slowly towards him, and rested her forehead on his shoulder. They stayed like that, still, breathing together, while Beatrice played on the floor with her little horse and the sun cast long shadows on the cement floor. Luciana cried, softly, without sobbing, just tears falling silently, not from sadness, from relief. The relief of someone who has carried a weight alone for so long that she has forgotten what it's like to have someone by her side. The relief of discovering that being seen is not weakness, that being chosen is not a mistake. That deserving something doesn't need justification. Daniel didn't promise anything that afternoon. He didn't talk about the future, about plans, about changing his life. He just stayed there, with the smell of coffee and cake in the kitchen, his hand in hers, his full presence. Things changed slowly as true things do. He didn't take her out of the city. He didn't shower her with gifts. He didn't try to fix her life with money, because her life wasn't broken. It was difficult, and difficult isn't the same thing as broken. He showed up, he stayed, he listened, he played with Beatrice in the yard. He fixed what needed fixing, not out of charity, but out of a sense of belonging, like someone who takes care of what is theirs. Luciana gradually let her guard down. Not all at once. The guard of a woman who has learned to survive on her own doesn't fall like that. First, a longer smile, then a late-night call, just to say that Beatrice had learned a new word. Then, an invitation to Sunday dinner. Then, a shared silence on the balcony that didn't need any words to be full. Beatrice was the first to say it. Children know first. One Sunday morning, while Daniel was helping her put on her shoes, she held his face in both hands, small, warm, determined hands, and said, "You're my best friend." He swallowed the lump in his throat and replied, "Yes, I am. Forever." Luciana listened from the kitchen doorway. She said nothing. She simply leaned her head against the doorframe and closed her eyes, with that smile that isn't one of joy, but of peace. The peace of someone who finally arrives at a place and realizes they no longer need to walk alone. Months later, on a rainy night, with Beatrice asleep in the bedroom and the two of them sitting on the worn sofa with their legs covered by an old blanket, Luciana said, "I never forgot either, you know? The notes, the blue pencil. You sitting in the front row with that crumpled notebook. I knew you liked me, and I liked you, but we were children, and life took us each in a different direction, and I thought that had died." She paused. It didn't die. Daniel kissed her. Slowly, carefully, like someone holding something they'd waited 20 years to get their hands on. The kiss tasted of coffee and rain and time. It tasted of a new beginning. He didn't move to the small town. She didn't move to the capital. But they found a middle ground, as people who want to stay more than they want to be, right, always do. He reduced his travels. She accepted that she didn't need to carry everything alone. Beatrice got a room with stars painted on the ceiling, done by Daniel one Saturday afternoon with cheap paint and a brush that was too thick, and she said they were the most beautiful stars in the world. One morning, while they were having coffee on the veranda, with Beatrice chasing a cat in the yard and the sun slowly rising behind the hills, Daniel looked at Luciana and said, "If the car hadn't broken down that day..." She interrupted him. "He didn't break, Daniel. He stopped. He stopped in the right place at the right time." She took a sip of coffee and smiled. "Sometimes things need to stop so we can finally find each other." He didn't answer. He simply held her hand across the table, felt the warmth of their intertwined fingers, and stood there, watching the sun rise, without haste, without fear, with the same simple clarity of things that don't need explaining to be true. And if someone were to pass by that road that morning, they would see only a small house, a simple porch, 2 coffee mugs, and 2 people in silence. Nothing extraordinary, nothing grand. Just life, finally, being fair.